Imagine sitting cross-legged on the carpet as a child, completely mesmerized by the colorful singing animals and the triumph of the human spirit on your television. We inherently trust children's media. We view fairy tales, animated features, and heartwarming, inspirational dramas as safe, sterile environments designed to nurture young, fragile minds. But what happens when you peel back the sugary veneer? The sugary veneer of completely manufactured nostalgia. What happens when you realize the beloved bedtime stories, the ones you were spoon-fed, were originally blueprints? They were blueprints for literal psychological torture, and those uplifting Hollywood miracles were built over graveyards, hidden graveyards of horrific medical abuse. Today, we are going to actively destroy your childhood. We are revisiting films that disguised absolute terror and profound human suffering as family-friendly entertainment. This isn't about movie magic. It is about cinematic betrayal. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, we have to start with the foundational bedrock. The foundational bedrock of childhood animation, the Disney Empire. In 1937, Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, essentially establishing a global monopoly on happily ever after. The film concludes with the evil queen plummeting off a cliff after a dramatic lightning strike, a sanitized cinematic exit. But the original fairy tales by the brothers Grimm weren't meant to comfort young children before sleep. They were brutal, medieval survival manuals designed to terrify children into blind obedience. In the unedited text, she doesn't just fall off a cliff. The prince and Snow White actively invite her to their wedding, as a calculated, sadistic punishment for her crimes. The royals force the queen to step into solid iron shoes that have been roasting inside a roaring furnace. They force her to dance in the red-hot footwear until she literally drops dead on the stone floor from the excruciating agony and severe third-degree burns. And this was by no means an isolated incident of total corporate sanitization. Consider the 1950 animated classic Cinderella. Disney gave a generation of children singing mice, a fairy godmother, and a magical pumpkin carriage. The original story features the wicked stepsisters mutilating their bodies. They did it systematically just to secure royal power. In a desperate, blood-soaked attempt to trick the prince, the mother orders one sister to slice off her toes, slicing them right off with a heavy butcher knife, while the other amputates a large chunk of her heel, just to force her mutilated foot into the glass slipper. The prince only realizes the gruesome deception later, when he notices the slipper rapidly filling with thick blood, overflowing with thick, pooling blood on the floor. The happy endings you absorbed are just corporate censorship. The cinematic versions deliberately erased the raw, visceral bodily mutilation that historically served as humanity's primary tool. The primary tool for teaching basic moral lessons. But the distortion of innocence isn't limited to fairy tales. Sometimes Hollywood takes profound, real-life systemic abuse and repackages it as a heartwarming, Oscar-winning triumph. A triumph of the human spirit, they claim. In 1988, audiences wept and cheered for Rain Man. The film portrays a touching, comedic road trip, a selfish yuppie and his autistic savant brother. The movie is widely credited with bringing autism awareness, wrapping a deeply complex neurological condition in a comforting blanket, an easily digestible blanket of brotherhood and card counting. However, what the film conveniently and deliberately omits is the horrifying medical reality that institutionalized people faced during the exact era the characters supposedly grew up in. The character of Raymond Babbitt was inspired by Kim Peek, a real-life megasavant, as they called him. In the film, Raymond lives in a quiet, peaceful facility, surrounded by caring nurses in an idyllic medical facility. But in the real world of the 20th century, Psychiatric institutions were active, government-funded torture chambers, literal torture chambers for neurodivergent individuals. Children and adults diagnosed with autism or severe disabilities were routinely subjected to massive doses of shock therapy, electroconvulsive shock therapy without the mercy of anesthesia. They were locked in barren solitary confinement cells, strapped tightly into straitjackets for days on end, heavily drugged with potent chemical restraints that essentially lobotomized them into complete compliance. The heartwarming narrative of a lovable genius counting toothpicks completely erases the historical backdrop of forced sterilizations, lobotomies, and brutal systemic abuse over the decades. Abuse that defined the neurodivergent experience for a generation. Hollywood essentially took a demographic that barely survived an era of horrific medical experimentation, and sanitized their immense trauma to win an award. Just to win a Best Picture Academy Award. They sold the audience a feel-good, cross-country trip, deliberately burying the agonizing screams of the institutionalized, burying them right beneath the cinematic asphalt. Yet, perhaps the most insidious form of this deception happens when the genre functions as a psychological trap. We are heavily conditioned to believe in animated animals, conditioned to believe they equate to a safe viewing experience. In 1978, parents blindly dropped their young children off. Dropped them off at movie theaters to watch Watership Down. The poster featured a soft, beautifully drawn watercolor rabbit, resting on a green hill like a gentle pastoral fable. What those unsuspecting children were actually subjected to was a relentless, blood-soaked epic of warfare, ecological devastation, and suffocating, inescapable death. The film follows rabbits fleeing the destruction of their home, fleeing the industrial, mechanical destruction of their warren. Rather than offering a whimsical, musical journey, the director forced young minds to watch a slaughter, to watch animated animals be brutally torn by dogs. The children watched rabbits get caught in steel snares, kicking and gasping as the wires slowly strangled them, choking to death on their own pooling blood. They watched them get buried alive in collapsing tunnels, suffocating in the absolute crushing dark underground. The film features a totalitarian, fascist rabbit dictator. General Woundwort rules his colony through violent physical mutilation, literally tearing the throats out of his enemies. In one of the most traumatizing scenes in animation history, a psychic rabbit named Fiver experiences a terrifying vision, an apocalyptic vision where the serene green fields run red, with rushing rivers of thick, crimson blood. Children sat in the dark, expecting the warmth of cartoons. Instead, they were ambushed by a heavy existential meditation. A meditation on mortality, tyranny, and ruthless indifference. The complete and ruthless indifference of wild nature. The vibrant colors and soft lines of traditional animation were actively weaponized to deliver deep psychological trauma. Trauma that lingered in a generation's minds for decades. We desperately cling to the media of our youth because it reminds us of a fleeting time,